大家好，
大家好，
讀你聽嘅時間。咁啊，我哋繼續讀咩書啊？
Dickens Great Expectations
第幾節
？55。
冇錯啦，接近尾聲啦嚇。咁啊，上回就講到咧，即係呢個逃走啊，呢個出走啊，
俾人捉，
成唔成功啊？
唔成功，
完全失敗啦，
受傷，
跌咗落水，係咪啊？咁啊，由於阿 provis 年紀都唔細啦，咁啊，即係都幾難捱啦，睇嚟都呢個傷勢。咁就compeyson 就係呢個叫人哋捉佢啦，咁啊呢個罪魁禍首啦。咁Herbert 咧就翻咗去先，咁啊得阿 pip 咧就自己就照顧住provis，咁但係 provis 係一個大罪在身噶嘛，咁所以即係阿 pip 都只能夠同佢分隔啦，短時間咁下一次阿 pip 要去探provis， 可能就係呢個 Magwitch 咧，可能就係要喺監倉入面啦，而唔係喺醫院嗰度啦，因為佢係罪犯啊嘛，係嘛？咁仲有就係阿 pip 嘅心思應該都唔會放喺佢嘅資產度啦，因為雖然佢都有一閃而過啦，咁但係佢都知道佢做唔到 gentleman， 即係佢恐怕都係要令到 Magwitch 失望啊，因為 Magwitch 其實呢一刻佢只有剩翻個心願嘅，就係阿 pip 繼續做 gentleman 喺上流度生存，做佢嘅遠大前程。
佢嘅金錢要充公。係
啦，因為佢要收歸國有啊嘛，因為佢係罪犯啊嘛。咁佢似乎冇考慮到呢一點啊 ，pip 亦都冇打算同佢講，渣都冇剩啊，咁樣即係唔會咁講啊，即係只係啦，即係只會話係啊。咁但係其實佢一方面佢都放心嘅，就因為佢知道 Herbert 即係有 Miss Herbert 上照顧，有 Miss Herbert 上關照啦，同埋Herbert 佢身邊嗰啲同佢嗰啲合夥人又真係好似做得幾好，即係似乎就真係有翻個回報咁樣，好嘛？咁我哋繼續睇落去啦，即係睇下其實而家個高潮位啊過咗啦，即係啲動作片段過咗啦，剩翻嘅就係收拾殘局啦，睇下 Magwitch 嘅下場咯，好嘛？好。Chapter 55. He was taken to the police court next day. He 即係 Magwitch 啦，我相信。And would have been immediately committed for trial, but that it was necessary to send down for an old officer of the prison ship from which he had once escaped to speak to his identity. Nobody doubted it, but compeyson, who had meant to dispose to it, was tumbling on the tides, dead. And it happened that there was not at that time any prison officer in London who would give the required evidence. 明唔明呢個意思啊？即係其實就係應該立即就要送佢去審判㗎啦，但係佢需要嘅係咩啊？人證啊嘛，證明佢以前係喺個囚犯船度逃走出嚟。咁但係呢一刻最可以證明嘅就係 compeyson 啊嘛，但係 compeyson 死咗啦嘛，佢喺同阿 provis 搏鬥嗰時喺個水度死咗啦。咁仲有邊個啊？咪揾當年啲獄卒咯。攞啲獄卒出嚟做證人咯，咁但係啲獄卒喺邊啊？唔喺倫敦，唔喺倫敦，咁即係話咩啊？即係話一時三刻都審判唔到佢。Okay? I had gone direct to Mr. Jaggers at his private house on my arrival overnight to retain his assistance, and Mr. Jaggers on the prisoner's behalf would admit nothing. It was the sole resource, for he told me that the case must be over in 5 minutes when the witness was there.And that no power on earth could prevent its going against us. I imparted to Mr. Jaggers my design of keeping him in ignorance of the fate of his wealth. Mr. Jaggers was querulous and angry with me for having let it slip through my fingers, and said we must memorialize by and by, and try at all events for some of it. But he did not conceal from me that, although there might be many cases in which the forfeiture would not be exacted, there were no circumstances in this case to make it one of them. I understood that very well. I was not related to the outlaw, or connected with him by any recognizable tie. He had put his hand to no writing or settlement in my favor before his apprehension, and to do so now would be idle. I had no claim, and I finally resolved, and ever afterwards abided by the resolution, that my heart should never be sickened with the hopeless task of attempting to establish one. 即係意思，即係呢度即係話咩啊？即係話 Jaggers 好唔高興，即係阿 Pip 唔 secure 佢嘅資產，係咪？而家渣都冇啦，係咪？咁但係阿 Pip 講到最尾就係即係道德佔咗道德高地啦，即係話無論點都好，我而家都好開心，即係我冇諗住去做呢啲任何去爭奪資產嘅行為亦都唔輪到我去做咁樣。There appeared to be reason for supposing that the drowned informer had hoped for a reward out of this forfeiture, 即係 compeyson 啦and had obtained some accurate knowledge of Magwitch's affairs. When his body was found many miles from the scene of his death, and so horribly disfigured that he was only recognizable by the contents of his pockets, notes were still legible, folded in a case he carried. Among these were the names of a banking house in New South Wales, where a sum of money was, and the designation of certain lands of considerable value. Both these heads of information were in a list that Magwitch, while in prison, gave to Mr. Jaggers, of the possessions he supposed I should inherit. His ignorance, poor fellow, at last served him. He never mistrusted but that my inheritance was quite safe, with Mr. Jaggers' aid. After 3 days' delay, during which the Crown prosecution stood over for a production of the witness from the prison ship, the witness came and completed the easy case. He was committed to take his trial in the next sessions, which would come on in a month. It was at this dark time of my life that Herbert returned home one evening, a good deal cast down, and said, "My dear Handel, I fear I shall soon have to leave you." His partner having prepared me for that, I was less surprised than he thought. "We shall lose a fine opportunity if I put off going to Cairo, and I am very much afraid I must go, Handel, when you most needed me. Herbert, I shall always need you, because I shall always love you. But my need is no greater now than at another time. You will be so lonely. I have no leisure to think of that," said I. "You know that I am always with him to the full extent of the time allowed, and that I should be with him all day long if I could. And when I come away from him, you know that my thoughts are with him." The dreadful condition to which he was brought was so appalling to both of us that we could not refer to it in plainer words. "My dear fellow," said Herbert, "let the near prospect of our separation, for it is very near, be my justification for troubling you about yourself. Have you thought of your future?" "No, for I have been afraid to think of any future." "But yours cannot be dismissed, indeed. My dear, dear Handel, it must not be dismissed. I wish you would enter on it now, as far as a few friendly words go, with me." "I will," said I. "In this branch house of ours, Handel, we must have a—" I saw that his delicacy was avoiding the right word, so I said, "a clerk." "A clerk, and I hope it is not at all unlikely that he may expand into a partner. Now, Handel, in short, my dear boy, will you come with me?" 即係其實即係請佢做佢嘅 clerk. There was something charmingly cordial and engaging in the manner in which, after saying, "Now, Handel," as if it were the grave beginning of a portentous business exordium, he had suddenly given up that tone, stretched out his honest hand, and spoken like a schoolboy. "Clara and I have talked about it again and again," Herbert pursued, "and the dear little thing begged me only this evening with tears in her eyes to say to you that if you would live with us when we come together, she will do her best to make you happy, and to convince her husband's friend that he is her friend too. We should get on so well, Handel, 一齊住添啊." I thanked her heartily, and I thanked him heartily, but said I could not yet make sure of joining him as he so kindly offered. Firstly, my mind was too preoccupied to be able to take in the subject clearly. Secondly, yes, Secondly, there was a fake something lingering in my thoughts that will come out very near the end of this slight narrative. But if you thought, Herbert, that you could, without doing any injury to your business, leave the question open for a little while. For any while, cried Herbert. 6 months, a year. Not so long as that, said I. 2 or 3 months at most. Herbert was highly delighted when we shook hands on this arrangement, and said he could now take courage to tell me that he believed he must go away at the end of the week. And Clara, said I. The dear little thing, returned Herbert, holds dutifully to her father as long as he lasts. But he wouldn't last long. Mrs. Wimple confides to me that he is certainly going. Not to say an unfeeling thing, said I. He cannot do better than go. I'm afraid that must be admitted, said Herbert. And then I shall come back for the dear little thing, and the dear little thing and I will walk quietly into the nearest church, remember? The blasted darling comes of no family, my dear Handel, and never looked into the red book, and hasn't a notion about her grandpapa. What a fortune for a son of my mother. On the Saturday in that same week, I took my leave of Herbert, full of bright hope, but sad and sorry to leave me, and he sat on one of the Seaport mail coaches. I went into a coffee house to write a little note to Clara, telling her he had gone off, sending his love to her over and over again, and then went to my lonely home, if it deserved a name, for it was now no home to me, and I had no home anywhere. On the stairs I encountered Wemmick, who was coming down after an unsuccessful application of his knuckles to my door. I had not seen him alone since the disastrous issue of the attempted flight, and he had come, in his private and personal capacity, to say a few words of explanation in reference to that failure. The late compeyson, said Wemmick, had by little and little got at the bottom of half of the regular business now transacted, and it was from the talk of some of his people in trouble that I heard what I did. I kept my ears open, seeming to have them shut, until I heard that he was absent, and I thought that would be the best time for making the attempt. I can only suppose now that it was a part of his policy, as a very clever man, habitually to deceive his own instruments. You don't blame me, I hope, Mr. Pip. I'm sure I tried to serve you with all my heart. I am as sure of all that, Wemmick, as you can be, and I thank you most earnestly for all your interest and friendship. Thank you very much. It's a bad job, said Wemmick, scratching his head, and I assure you I haven't been so cut up for a long time. What I look at is the sacrifice of so much portable property. Dear me! What I think of, Wemmick, is the poor owner of the property. Yes, to be sure, said Wemmick. Of course, there can be no objection to your being sorry for him, and I put down a £5 note myself to get him out of it. But what I look at is this. The late compeyson, having been beforehand with him in intelligence of his return, and being so determined to bring him to book, I do not think he could have been saved. Whereas the portable property certainly could have been saved. There's a difference between the property and the owner, don't you see? I invited Wemmick to come upstairs and refresh himself with a glass of grog before walking to Walworth. He accepted the invitation. While he was drinking his moderate allowance, he said, with nothing to leap up to it, and after having appeared rather fidgety, "What do you think of my meaning to take a holiday on Monday, Mr. Pip?" "Why, I suppose you have not done such a thing these 12 months. These 12 years, more likely," said Wemmick. "Yes, I'm going to take a holiday. More than that, I'm going to take a walk. More than that, I'm going to ask you to take a walk with me." I was about to excuse myself as being but a bad companion just then, when Wemmick anticipated me. "I know your engagements," said he, "and I know you are out of sorts, Mr. Pip. But if you could oblige me, I should take it as a kindness. It ain't a long walk, and it's an early one. Say it might occupy you from 8 to 12. Couldn't you stretch a point and manage it?" He had done so much for me at various times that this was very little to do for him. I said I could manage it, would manage it, and he was so very much pleased by my acquiescence that I was pleased too. At his particular request, I appointed... 停一停。好，繼續。At his particular request, I appointed to call for him at the council at 8:30 on Monday morning, and so we parted for the time. Punctual to my appointment, I rang at the castle gate on a Monday morning and was received by Wemmick himself, who struck me as looking tighter than usual, and having a sleeker hat on. Within, there were 2 glasses of rum and milk prepared and 2 biscuits. The aged, must have been staring with the lark, for, glancing into the perspective of his bedroom, I observed that his bed was empty. When we had fortified ourselves with the rum and milk and biscuits, and were going out for a walk, with that training preparation on us, I was considerably surprised to see Wemmick take up a fishing rod and put it over his shoulder. "Why, we are not going fishing," said I. "No," returned Wemmick, "but I like to walk with one." I thought this odd. However, I said nothing, and we set off. We went towards Camberwell Green, and when we were thereabouts, Wemmick said suddenly, "Halloa, here's the church." There was nothing very surprising in that, but again I was rather surprised when he said, as if he were animated by a brilliant idea, "Let's go in." We went in, Wemmick leaving his fishing rod in the porch, and looked all round. In the meantime, Wemmick was diving into his coat pockets and getting something out of paper there. "Halloa," said he, "here's a couple of pair of gloves. Let's put them on." As the gloves were white kid gloves, and as the post office was widened to its utmost extent, I now began to have my strong suspicions. They were strengthened into certainty when I beheld the aged enter at a side door, escorting a lady. "Halloa," said Wemmick, "here's Miss Skiffins. Let's have a wedding." That discreet damsel was attired as usual, except that she was now engaged in substituting for her green kid gloves a pair of white. The aged was likewise occupied in preparing a similar sacrifice for the altar of Hymen. The old gentleman, however, experienced so much difficulty in getting his gloves on that Wemmick found it necessary to put him with his back against the pillar, and then to get behind the pillar himself and pull away at them, while I, for my part, held the old gentleman round the waist, that he might present an equal and safe resistance. By dint of this ingenious scheme, his gloves were got on to perfection. The clerk and clergyman then appearing, we were ranged in order at those fatal rails. True to his notion of seeming to do it all without preparation, I heard Wemmick say to himself, as he took something out of his waistcoat pocket before the service began, "Halloa, here's a ring." I acted in the capacity of backer or best man to the bridegroom, while a little limp pew-opener in a soft bonnet like a baby's made a feint of being the bosom friend of Miss Skiffins. The responsibility of giving the lady away devolved upon the aged, which led to the clergyman's being unintentionally scandalized, and it happened thus. When he said, "Who giveth this woman to be married to this man?" the old gentleman, not in the least knowing what point of ceremony we had arrived at, stood most amiably beaming at the 10 Commandments, upon which the clergyman said again, "Who giveth this woman to be married to this man?" The old gentleman being still in a state of most estimable unconsciousness, the bridegroom cried out in his accustomed voice, "Now, aged P, you know, who giveth?" To which the aged replied with great briskness, before saying that he gave. "All right, John, all right, my boy." And the clergyman came to so gloomy a pause upon it that I had doubts for the moment whether we should get completely married that day. It was completely done, however, and when we were out of church, Wemmick took the cover off the font and put his white gloves in it and put the cover on again. Mrs. Wemmick, more heedful of the future, put her white gloves in her pocket and assumed her green. "Now, Pip," said Wemmick, triumphantly shouldering the fishing rod as we came out, "let me ask you whether anybody would suppose this to be a wedding party." Breakfast had been ordered at a pleasant little tavern, a mile or so away upon the rising ground beyond the green, and there was a bagatelle board in the room, in which we should decide to unbend our minds after the solemnity. It was pleasant to observe that Mrs. Wemmick no longer unwound Wemmick's arm when it adapted itself to her figure, but sat in a high-backed chair against the wall, like a violoncello in its case, and submitted to be embraced as that melodious instrument might have done. We had an excellent breakfast, and when anyone declined anything on table, Wemmick said, "Provided by contract, you know, don't be afraid of it." I drank to the new couple, drank to the aged, drank to the castle, saluted the bride at parting, and made myself as agreeable as I could. Wemmick came down to the door with me, and I again shook hands with him and wished him joy. "Thank ye," said Wemmick, rubbing his hands. She's such a manager of vowels, you have no idea. You shall have some eggs and judge for yourself. I say, Mr. Pip, calling me back and speaking low, this is altogether a Walworth sentiment, please. I understand, not to be mentioned in Little Britain, said I. Wemming nodded. After what you let out the other day, Mr. Jaggers may as well not know of it. He might think my brain was softening, or something of the kind. 咁即係呢度有個少少嘅插曲啦，係嘛？咁啊就係呢個 Wemmick 結婚啦，咁啊佢好想阿 Pip 參與啦，一早唔同佢講。證婚人啊嘛佢。你當佢係咧，其實佢又唔係嘅，即係你當佢係 best man 咁咯。佢有講嘅話，佢 best man。因為你證婚人你需要法律知識噶嘛，佢冇。阿 Pip 係無所事事。可能以前冇咯，但係佢即係佢一個 witness 啦，呢個肯定嘅嚇，一個 best man 咁啦。即係其實即係講咁多，即係咩？即係佢阿 Pip 雖然冇咗，失去咗好多嘢，物質上嘅嘢尤其是。但係佢同時間佢都有兩個知己好友啦，一個係 Herbert 啦，願意照顧翻佢轉頭啦，請佢啦，同一齊住啦 ，convince 咗佢老婆同佢一齊生活啦，係咪？而另外一方面咧，阿 Wemmick 咧亦都邀請佢做佢嘅 best friend， 即係做佢 best man， 即係 best man 其實有一種意味就係當你係 best friend 嘅，其實咁即係喺一個咁唔開心嘅情況底下，個故事又有一個 twist。即係又開心翻喎，咁但係個節奏其實就打亂咗少少，個節奏有啲打亂咗，因為呢度其實佢係呢度係話佢等緊個 trial 嘅，等緊個 trial 嚇，咁但係就即係 Pip 呢段時間就喺度做咩咧？就喺度做呢啲無聊聊咁咯，即係其實就係、節奏有啲斷，其實就係講咩？其實就係講阿 Pip 點算啫嘛，之後點算啫嘛。咁喺段短時間之內，佢都唔知點算，咁啊做住啲 social 嘅嘢先啦。上流社會嘅人其實做嚟做去都係做呢啲嘢啫嘛，係咪先？做真係工作嘅中產做嘅啫嘛，中低下階層做嘅啫嘛。你啲上流社會嘅人就係 social 嘅啫嘛。佢都依然係着住佢嗰套禮服㗎，係咪？咁開一個開心嘅 twist， 即係我有啲意想不到啦。我以為即係會繼續慘落去啊！喺床邊怨天怨地，點知唔係喎，開心喎，但估你唔到，咁啊輕鬆啲啦，幾好嘅。咁我哋下一節又繼續睇個尾聲會係點啦，同埋真係要 wrap up 㗎啦，真係要知道Magwitch 嘅下場啦，同埋最緊要就係 Estella 啊嘛，點樣同 Estella 收科啊嘛。其實你講嘅 Herbert 同 Wemmick 幾唔重要，即係對我嚟講啊，我都唔係好 care 佢哋嘅下場咯。我係 care， 即係 Wemmick 結唔結婚對我嚟講真係唔重要咯。講真，個重要係 Pip 點算啊嘛，同埋阿 Jo 咧，仲有阿 Jo 咧，係嘛，都唔講佢哋，係嘛，剩翻真係要講，係咯，同埋仲有 Miss Havisham 咧，係嘛，都要講佢哋，好嘛？下次再講啦，拜拜。